my name is Kyle Lang, and the new media artist I chose for my creative response is Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol, or rather Andrew Warhol, was born on August 6, 1928 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. As a child, he suffered from Sydenham chorea, a rare neurological disorder affecting those usually in childhood. The disease causes involuntary movements around the whole body. When the disorder kept him away from school, he would spend his time reading comic books, playing with paper cutouts, and reading magazines. At 8 years old, his parents bought him his first camera. Also, Warhol was into collecting and documenting everything around him. Warhol took free Tom O'Shanter art classes at Carnegie Institute taught by Joseph Fitzpatrick. Warhol attended the Carnegie Institute of Technology, now referred to as Carnegie Mellon University, from 1945 to 1949. Now entering the 1950s. After graduating with a degree in pictorial design, Warhol traveled to New York City to pursue a career as a commercial artist. His art first appeared in 1949 issue of Glamour magazine, in which he illustrated a story called What is Success? He became an award-winning illustrator throughout the 1950s. Warhol was known for his plotted line ink drawings, and this method combined drawing with basic printmaking, which allowed repetition of an image, something that was important to his commercial illustrations. Here is the design that Andy Warhol drew for Glamour magazine. Warhol was a homosexual and during the 1950s was considered a crime in America. Many of Warhol's works were rejected from galleries because of the homosexuality matter that was presented in these works. Warhol had also enlisted his mother, Julia Warhol, to add a feminine touch to each of his drawings and illustrations. In 1956, he presented a solo exhibition at the Bodley Gallery called Studies for a Boy Book, which had sketches of young men and erotic portrayals of male nudes. Even his films in the 1960s incorporated these sexual matters. Now entering the 1960s, Warhol turned his attention to the pop art movement. Much of the pop art movement revolved around mass-produced products and commercial products. Much of Warhol's pop paintings were based on comics and ads, one of which was Warhol's 1961 Coca-Cola 2. Warhol's commercial art was hand-painted until 1962 when he adapted photographic silkscreen painting. By doing this, he was able to reproduce the images. Also in 1962, Warhol turned a majority of his attention to celebrity portraits. Alongside that, he made a series of Campbell's soup cans and featured them in his first solo exhibition in Los Angeles. Here is an image of Andy Warhol's Campbell's soup cans in 1962. In 1963, Warhol began his series of death and disaster paintings, in which he took images that showed, well, death and disasters from news outlets. Warhol also began making box sculptures with the help of the Silver Factory. He created hundreds of replicas of these commercial boxes. Here is an example of one of the sculptures he's made with Prelo soap pad boxes. Between the 1963 and 1968, Warhol produced numerous amount of films, and in 1966 he made his most commercially successful film, The Chelsea's Girls. It can also be said that Warhol was likely the first artist in the United States to incorporate video as art. Here is a quote that I have taken from the book New Media and Art, the second edition by Michael Rush. Obviously enamored of the reproducibility of art objects through his experience as a designer and printmakers, examples 100 Campbell's soup cans 1962 or 35 Jackies 1963, as well as his photographer, Warhol was naturally drawn to the moving camera. In 1966, Warhol expanded into performance art with the debut of his traveling cinematic multimedia performance Exploding Plastic Inevitable, featuring the Velvet Underground and Nico. On June 3, 1968, Warhol was shot by Valerie Solanas, who was a writer for one of Warhol's films. Warhol was physically and emotionally scarred by the event. The event reflected on his later working practice from an experimental collaborative approach to a much more guarded one. Now entering the 1970s, Warhol published several books: Andy Warhol's Index in 1967, The Philosophy of Andy Warhol in 1975, and the Andy Warhol Diaries series from 1976 to 1987. Also in the 1970s, Warhol received hundreds of commissions from music artists to film stars, one of which was for the Rolling Stones album cover Sticky Fingers in 1971. The cover would be nominated for a Grammy Award. Here is a picture of Andy Warhol's index book and the album cover of Sticky Fingers. Warhol was infatuated with Hollywood celebrities and fame during the 1970s. Warhol used a Polaroid camera and a tape recorder to document his daily life. He also used the Polaroid photos as source materials for his iconic celebrity portraits and still lives. And also in 1974, he would start his largest serial work. Now entering the 1980s, Warhol went back to hand painting instead of using silkscreen. He had also produced two shows and appeared in a few, like SNL. The shows he produced were Andy Warhol's TV, that ran from 1980 to 83, and Andy Warhol's 15 Minutes, that ran from 1985 to 87. In 1984, Warhol was commissioned by Alexander Aiolis. All of the commissions that Warhol made all featured Da Vinci's The Last Supper. In the few months leading to his death, Warhol created a series of self-portraits. On February 22, 1987, Warhol died at New York Hospital in Manhattan due to complications following surgery. There is a project that goes on for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is called Figment. The project is partnered with EarthCam, which has a camera pointed at Andy Warhol's grave. Here's a quote by Andy Warhol in 1985. "I never understood why when you died you didn't just vanish, and everything could just keep going on the way it was, only you just wouldn't be there. I always thought I'd, like my own tombstone, be blank. No epitaph and no name. Well, actually, I'd like to say Figment." And now I would like to talk about what I've created for my creative response. First off, I need to give why I created what I've created. When I was brainstorming about what to make my piece about, I wanted to make a piece that reflected Andy Warhol's use of repetition and commercial artist history. One of his pieces that stood out to me was green Coca-Cola bottles, which was just a bunch of green Coca-Cola bottles next to each other in a 16 by 7 grid-like structure with the company's logo at the bottom. Seeing how simple yet intriguing the piece was, I wanted to do something like that. I also wanted to choose an everyday item like Andy Warhol did when he was a commercial artist. So I did more research and I found out Warhol made a piece called Apple Macintosh. Trying to find the reason why Warhol incorporated these colors, I dove deeper and found out that the Apple logo used these colors in 1977. The colors were based off of what the original Macintosh could come in. Inspired by his green Coca-Cola bottles and Apple Macintosh, I decided to choose an Apple logo. The final product that I came up with was called Apple Colors. As a base template, I went with the 1977 Apple logo. The decision to choose from 1977 was because of Andy Warhol's Apple Macintosh. Seeing these colors, I wanted to have iPhones in the background surrounding the logo, but seeing as how there were so many different colors, I couldn't just stick with the iPhone. The Apple company was so much more. I wanted to incorporate them all going by release date. That was also the reason why I chose to color them as they were. They also were in this grid-like structure that Andy Warhol was known for during his commercial artist days. Thank you for watching my creative response. Here's my works cited page.